What is the state of the situation now in Afghanistan in terms of the strength of the Kabul government and the resurgence of the Taliban?
Well, first, it's hard. You can't characterize it in just one dimension. So I have to say one thing first. I can't say several things at the same time, but I would like the listeners to take them all into account. So let's say, first, what you said is true. That is, the security situation has deteriorated. The Taliban are present in or have some kind of de facto control over larger parts of the territory. And I might mention, unfortunately, we tend to cover these things in terms of countries, so we're talking about Afghanistan. But in fact, the Taliban exist in both Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And the Pakistani Taliban have actually greatly expanded their control over parts of the territory of Pakistan, and even some of their supporters took over a major mosque in the capital city of Islamabad, which is something that the Afghan Taliban would not be able to do in Kabul. So this is not just an Afghan problem. According to the information I've had for quite some time, and it was reported again yesterday, Taliban have also infiltrated extremely close to Kabul, and they're carrying out attacks in the areas all around Kabul.
Now, when you talk about the Taliban in Pakistan, and especially the mosque siege, I guess that was a couple months ago now, in what sense are we talking about the same group? Are we talking about sympathetic? Are we talking about Afghans who are operating from Pakistan? I mean, can you give me a sense of what, when we say that the Taliban is also in Pakistan, can you give me a sense of what that means exactly?
All right, it means several things. First of all, most of the intelligence agencies agree that the leadership of the Afghan Taliban is based in Pakistan, in particular in and around the city of Quetta, and they have a supreme council that meets there and makes the major decisions. Certainly, most of the recruitment and training of the Afghan Taliban is done in Pakistan. Much of that recruitment is of Afghans who were born in Pakistan as refugees and were recruited into madrasas. There are some Pakistanis who fight in Afghanistan as well. But in addition to that, there are Pakistanis who are in a movement which is more or less the Pakistani Taliban, and that's what they call themselves.
Another thing that we hear about a lot in this country is the situation for Pervez Musharraf in Pakistan, and what seems to be the rapid erosion of his power base. You see these exiled politicians, Sharif and Bhutto, either coming back to the country or planning to come back. Now, the strategic role that the U.S. set out for Pakistan was basically, as I understand it, that obviously they would try to crack down on jihadist elements within the country and at least put sufficient pressure on the groups in these tribal areas that they wouldn't be able to make trouble in Afghanistan, or plot terrorist incidents in other parts of the world. How does Musharraf's problems affect what you're describing, both in Afghanistan and in these tribal areas?
Well, first, let's put this in perspective in terms of U.S. national security interest. There's a very bizarre situation, which is that Osama bin Laden and the major leaders of Al-Qaeda, which, as far as I know, is still the organization that attacked us on 9/11, has its headquarters in Pakistan. It has its secure headquarters in Pakistan, in those tribal agencies. Furthermore, Pakistan is a government that has nuclear weapons. Now, according to the administration, the biggest threat to the United States is the potential of nuclear weapons getting into the hands of terrorists. There is nowhere in the world where that is more likely to happen than in Pakistan. So you might ask, why is it that we have concentrated all our efforts in Iraq, which had nothing to do with September 11th, while we allied with the military government in Pakistan, and we even took our ambassador out of Pakistan, transferred him to Iraq, and didn't even replace him for many months. This is just unbelievable. It is such a dereliction of duty on the part of the Bush administration to the national security of the United States that it boggles the mind. But it seems that everyone is so bewitched by this idea that somehow Iraq is the center of the war on terrorism and Pervez Musharraf is our ally, that they are neglecting this gross negligence which is putting our country in danger. Now, so this is not just some side issue of some minor country that doesn't get enough attention. This is major failure of the first rank to address the biggest threat to the United States, and that is not my opinion. That is the opinion of all the intelligence agencies of the United States in the National Intelligence Estimate. I cannot say, speak more strongly about that. Now, in order to try to address that issue, the administration paid very little attention to the problem of political legitimacy in Pakistan. They basically sided, as American governments have tended to do, especially Republican-led American governments, with the military in Pakistan, and thought that they could handle the whole situation. And of course the military in Pakistan told them they would do that. So the military arrested some of the Arab leadership of al-Qaeda from time to time. They allowed a safe haven for the Taliban and even gave them some indirect support by allowing Pakistani political parties to support them, not because they support terrorism against the United States, but because they have a lot of political problems with Afghanistan that we also have not addressed. We never did anything to try to support a democratic transition or the legitimization of the government in Pakistan. Even when the entire legal profession of Pakistan was on the streets protesting against their military dictatorship, this administration, which claims to have a freedom agenda, sent its high-ranking officials to say that they still supported General Musharraf. Now, the result is, today, the government has lost a lot of its legitimacy on legal grounds because it defied the courts, although finally it was defeated by them. It is losing legitimacy that's attempting to build on democratic grounds because it has not yet reached an agreement with the democratic parties. It has lost the legitimacy the military tried to build up on the basis of Islamic politics because they have been fighting against these Islamist groups rather in a desultory way, but at the request of the United States. And it is losing its national credibility as a defender of the country because it cannot control the territory, and everyone sees that India is becoming a much more important regional power, and it's been pressured by the United States to stop the fighting in Kashmir, or to lower the temperature in Kashmir. So the result is that you've had a hollowing out of political party at the center in Pakistan. Now, the situation in the border regions of Pakistan, the areas that border on Afghanistan, has often been very separate from the situation in the country as a whole. But what is happening now is that the impact of the situation in the border regions on the military and its political legitimacy is interacting with the electoral process that is underway in the capital and nationwide because of the elections that are scheduled by Pakistan's constitution. And it's possible, the good outcome would be, is if the military and some of the politicians arrive at an agreement to negotiate a transition which will be more stable. But there is also the danger that they will not reach such an agreement, and the military will continue to lose its support from its own troops, and that the government will become less and less effective. Now, can you imagine if we start to see a collapse of a government that has nuclear weapons in a country where al-Qaeda is headquartered, and U.S. has its troops, its money, its budget, all its attention, its intelligence assets, and everything bogged down in Iraq?
Let me ask you one question. This is sort of a devil's advocate question, but at least in terms of how this debate has been carried on in the United States, the argument has been, with respect to Musharraf, that all the problems with him in terms of legitimacy, effectiveness, etc., but that given the state of things in Pakistan at the moment, that if you did have a democratic government, it would probably be, if not pro-Taliban, at least much less sympathetic to the United States, and would thus, be even worse in terms of trying to, crack down on these elements that we think are going to sponsor terrorist attacks against us. What is now? Former Prime Minister Bhutto I don't believe she's returned yet, but she's made arrangements to return. Former Prime Minister Sharif has tried to and was kicked back out. Can you give us a sense of how much sense does that argument make?
Well, it confuses several things. One is, certainly, if the people of Pakistan could elect their representatives, those representatives would express more opposition to the United States, because it is a fact that the prestige and reputation of the United States is the lowest that it has ever been in the history of our country throughout the world, including in Pakistan. And that is not because of Pakistani politicians. That's because of the Bush administration. And that is another major threat to the security of the United States, which they seem to be unable to address in any manner except by making the situation worse by supporting repressive leaders. Now, the fact that people are highly critical of our policies does not mean that they support terrorism. And there is no chance whatsoever that an elected government in Pakistan would support terrorism or would join some kind of anti-American coalition along with Islamist radicals. The political situation in Pakistan has never been like that. The results of elections has never been like that. It is a kind of a scare story that is spread by the Pakistan military or by whoever is in power in Pakistan, that if you don't deal with them, then the country will be taken over by a lot of bearded radicals with machine guns. But you know, the Pakistan army has nuclear weapons. It's not going to be run out of town by a bunch of bearded radicals with machine guns. It's not Afghanistan. So what we should have been doing, and what we should still do, is work with the Pakistan military, which depends on the United States for most of its military supplies, and with Pakistan politicians, to bring about a peaceful transition that will make a legitimate government and leave room for the military to carry out its legitimate national defense obligations. That means that the government will take more openly anti-American positions than Musharraf does, because it will have to listen to the voices of the people. But I'm afraid that if you're a global power, you also have to listen to the opinions of people around the world. But there's no chance that an elected government in Pakistan would support the Taliban or try to undermine the Karzai government.